The Galactic Council had just finished cataloging every known species' survival limitations when Dr. Fletcher decided to strip naked in a simulation designed to kill anything stupid enough to enter it. What happened next didn't just break their precious theories about biological adaptation. It shattered every assumption they'd made about what separates civilization from extinction. Turns out, when you evolve on a planet that's been actively trying to murder you for 7 million years, you develop some interesting hobbies. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out. Because today, we're about to witness what happens when a human engineer decides to give the galaxy's leading xenobiologists a masterclass in why Earth doesn't just produce survivors. It produces apex predators who think extinction-level challenges make for decent weekend entertainment. The Meridian's Edge Research Station had hosted many boring lectures, but Dr. Kes Veltar's presentation on universal survival theory promised to be particularly tedious. The crystalline Zephyrian clicked through holographic displays with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list, while their mixed-species audience shifted restlessly in their ergonomic seating pods. "No sentient species," Veltar announced, their translucent form refracting the presentation lights into prismatic rainbows, "can survive unassisted in hostile environments without either advanced technology or specialized evolutionary adaptations. This is biological law." The Corythian delegation, massive furry creatures who looked like bears crossed with accountants, nodded approvingly. Their homeworld's frozen wasteland had shaped them into living furnaces wrapped in natural parkas. In the back row, a cluster of Threxian engineers clicked their chitinous mandibles in agreement. Their exoskeletons could withstand pressures that would liquefy most other species. "Consider the evidence," Veltar continued, gesturing to a holographic display showing various species in their native environments. "Corythians survive sub-Arctic conditions through dense fur and modified circulatory systems. Threxians endure toxic atmospheres via specialized respiratory filters. Even my own people crystallize in extreme cold to preserve core functions." They paused dramatically. "Remove these adaptations, strip away technology, and every species faces inevitable death within hours." "Interesting theory," came a voice from the middle section. "Completely wrong, but interesting." The audience turned toward the speaker, a human female in standard station coveralls, feet propped casually on the seat in front of her. Her nameplate read, "Fletcher, Environmental Engineering," though most beings on the station simply knew her as the one who fixed their life support when it broke and made sarcastic comments about their delicate atmospheric requirements. Veltar's crystal form brightened, a sign of irritation. "I beg your pardon?" "Your theory," Fletcher said, not bothering to sit up properly. "It's based on the assumption that survival requires specialized biological equipment. But what if you've got a species that's specialized for not being specialized?" "Explain." Fletcher shrugged. "Humans." A ripple of what might charitably be called laughter passed through the audience. The Corythians made deep, rumbling sounds. The Threxians clicked dismissively. "Humans," Veltar said with the patience of someone addressing a particularly slow child, "are perhaps the most poorly adapted species in known space. No fur, thin skin, vulnerable to temperature extremes, require specific atmospheric composition, possess no natural weapons or armor. According to every biological metric, humans should have gone extinct long before achieving sapience." "Should have," Fletcher agreed. "Funny thing about humans, though, we don't really care what should happen." Dr. Yexmar, a Threxian xenobiologist whose specialty was evolutionary impossibilities, leaned forward with interest. Are you suggesting humans possess some unknown adaptation? I'm not suggesting anything, Fletcher said. I'm stating a fact. Drop any human naked into a hostile environment, and they'll either survive or die trying something creative enough to make the attempt interesting. The audience exchanged glances. Veltar's crystalline form dimmed slightly. That is scientifically implausible. Is it? Fletcher finally sat up, fixing the Zephyrian with a look that suggested she found their entire species mildly amusing. How many humans have you studied in actual survival scenarios? Laboratory simulations indicate— Laboratory simulations, Fletcher interrupted, are like testing swimming ability in a bathtub. Accurate up to a point, completely useless beyond that point. Commander Threxall, the station's Carathian security chief, spoke up with the deep bass voice that made lesser species instinctively check their life insurance policies. Even if we accepted your premise, human, no species could survive the conditions in our emergency simulation protocols. The extinction protocol scenarios are designed to be absolutely lethal. Lethal to you, maybe. The room fell silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause. Veltar's form brightened to an almost blinding intensity. Are you suggesting you could survive an extinction protocol simulation without equipment? Fletcher considered this with the expression of someone deciding whether to have coffee or tea with breakfast. Suggesting? Number offering to demonstrate? Sure, if you're curious. Impossible, Dr. Yexmar clicked. The simulation chamber can replicate Kepler 438b surface conditions, sub-zero temperatures, toxic atmospheric pockets, hostile predatory fauna. The biological stress alone would kill most species before they could even attempt survival behaviors. Most species, Fletcher acknowledged, but then most species didn't evolve on Earth. Commander Threxall leaned back in his reinforced seating pod. What exactly are you proposing? Fletcher stood, stretching with the casual confidence of someone who had never met an environment she couldn't figure out. Simple demonstration. Load up your nastiest survival scenario in the sim chamber. I'll go in without gear and show you how a human handles hostile conditions. Without gear, Veltar's voice rose an octave. But you'll die. Maybe, Fletcher said with a grin that made several species suddenly remember why their ancestors had been prey animals. But probably not, and even if I do, you'll learn something about human survival psychology in the process. The audience began talking at once, a cacophony of clicks, growls, and crystalline chimes that the universal translator struggled to parse. Through the chaos, Commander Threxall's bass voice cut like a glacier through warm air. You would do this? Actually enter an extinction protocol simulation unequipped? Fletcher was already heading for the exit. I would. In fact, I will. Give me 10 minutes to finish my engineering rounds, then meet me at Simulation Bay 3, and program something challenging. I've had a boring week. As the chamber doors sealed behind her, the assembled xenobiologists sat in stunned silence. Dr. Veltar's crystalline form had gone completely transparent, their species equivalent of a panic attack. She's bluffing, Yexmar finally clicked. No sentient being would willingly enter certain death for the sake of proving a point. No, Commander Threxall rumbled thoughtfully, his predatory instincts stirring in ways they hadn't since his homeworld's hunting seasons. But then, we've never dealt with humans before, have we? 10 minutes later, the observation deck of Simulation Bay 3 was packed with every off-duty researcher, engineer, and security officer on the station. Word traveled fast in enclosed environments, and the prospect of watching either a spectacular human death or an impossible survival demonstration had drawn a crowd that represented a dozen different species. Fletcher arrived precisely on time, still in her engineering coveralls, carrying nothing but a small breathing apparatus. Standard atmospheric filter, she explained, holding up the device. I can handle most environmental factors, but I do need oxygen. Everything else? She gestured vaguely. We'll figure it out as we go. Veltar materialized beside the simulation controls, their form still translucent with anxiety. Fletcher, I must protest. This is unnecessary. My theory stands regardless of— Your theory, Fletcher interrupted, stepping into the simulation chamber, is about to get field-tested by someone who spent their childhood playing survival games that would hospitalize your entire species. The chamber door sealed with a pressurized hiss. Fletcher stood in the center of the empty white room, hands on her hips, looking for all the world like someone waiting for a particularly slow elevator. Kepler 438b surface conditions, Commander Threxall announced over the comm system. Temperature, -40 degrees standard. Atmospheric toxicity, moderate to high. Predatory fauna, active and aggressive. Terrain, rocky wasteland with minimal vegetation. He paused. Estimated survival time for unequipped sentient beings, approximately 8 minutes. Fletcher's response was audible through the chamber's audio pickups. 8 minutes? That's optimistic. Most species would be unconscious in 3. Then why? Fletcher was already removing her jacket. Because I'm not most species. The simulation flickered to life around her, transforming the sterile white chamber into a frozen hellscape that made the assembled observers instinctively adjust their environmental controls. Wind howled through jagged rock formations. The air itself seemed to shimmer with toxic particles. And in the center of it all, Fletcher smiled and began unbuttoning her shirt. "Oh," she said conversationally to the watching aliens. "Did I mention? Humans don't just survive hostile environments. We do it naked." The observation deck fell silent except for the sound of several species frantically recalculating everything they thought they knew about biological limitations. What happened next would be discussed in xenobiology journals for decades, though most of the initial observers would need therapy first. Fletcher's shirt hit the simulated ground with casual indifference, revealing pale skin that should have been flash freezing in the sub-zero environment. Instead, she stretched her arms overhead like someone greeting a pleasant morning rather than a frozen wasteland designed to kill her within minutes. "Fascinating," Dr. Yexmar clicked, mandibles working furiously as he recorded data. "No immediate hypothermic response. Skin flushing suggests active vasodilation rather than the expected vasoconstriction." "She's dying," Veltar insisted, their crystalline form flickering between transparency and opacity. "She must be. No biological system can maintain core temperature under these conditions without—" Fletcher's boots followed the shirt. Bare feet touched ground that registered -43 degrees standard, and she wiggled her toes experimentally. "Uncomfortable," she announced conversationally, "but manageable. Earth's got places like this: Siberia, Antarctica, Minnesota in January." She paused thoughtfully. "Though Minnesota's usually windier." Commander Threxall's predatory instincts were screaming warnings that his rational mind couldn't process. Something was fundamentally wrong with what he was witnessing. Prey didn't behave like this. Vulnerable creatures didn't strip themselves naked in killing conditions and then critique the weather. Fletcher's pants joined the growing pile of discarded clothing. She stood in the howling, toxic wind, wearing only undergarments and the breathing apparatus, conducting what appeared to be a casual inventory of her surroundings. "Rocky terrain, minimal vegetation, wind patterns from the northwest," she muttered, apparently talking to herself rather than the horrified audience. "Elevation changes suggest water flow patterns. Toxic particulates heavier than standard atmosphere, so they'll settle in depressions." She was analyzing the environment like an engineering problem. "This is madness," whispered Dr. Nexvara, a Deltan physiologist whose species required heated environmental suits just to survive in standard station atmosphere. Her core temperature should be dropping catastrophically. Instead, Fletcher was removing her remaining garments with the methodical efficiency of someone changing for bed. The final pieces of cloth fell away, leaving her completely naked except for the small breathing device. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the killing wind wash over bare skin, and smiled. "Right then," she said, addressing the observation deck directly. "Pop quiz for you xenobiologists. What's the difference between a human and every other species you've studied?" Before anyone could answer, she was moving. Not the frantic, panicked movements of a dying creature, but the purposeful strides of someone with a plan. "We sweat," she continued, jogging toward a cluster of crystalline formations that jutted from the wasteland like frozen teeth. "Sounds trivial, doesn't it? But most species pant or shed heat through specialized organs, or just accept whatever temperature their environment provides." She reached the crystal formations and began examining them with professional interest, running her hands over surfaces that should have burned her skin with cold. "Humans?" Fletcher grasped a crystal outcropping and snapped it free with a sharp twist. "Humans are walking climate control systems. We heat up, we cool down, we adapt our internal temperature to whatever stupid situation we've wandered into." The crystal shard in her hands was razor sharp and roughly the length of her forearm. She tested its edge against her thumb, drawing a thin line of blood that steamed in the frigid air. "Excellent," she said with genuine satisfaction. "Natural napping material." Dr. Yexmar's recordings were approaching data overflow. "She's making tools. Naked, in sublethal conditions, she's manufacturing weapons." "Not weapons yet," Fletcher corrected, apparently still able to hear them through the simulation's audio feeds. "Tools first, weapons later. Humans are methodical about violence." She was already moving again, this time toward a depression in the terrain, where the toxic particulates had settled into drifts of glittering poison. Any sane creature would avoid such an area. Fletcher walked directly into it. "Secondary advantage of human biology," she announced, scooping handfuls of the toxic material. "We're basically walking chemical processing plants. Liver, kidneys, immune system, all designed to handle substances that would kill most species." She was packing the toxic sediment around the base of several crystal shards, creating what looked disturbingly like primitive mortar. "She's using the environmental hazard as construction material," Commander Threxall observed, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone whose worldview was undergoing violent reconstruction. "Improvised cement," Fletcher agreed. "The particulates have binding properties when mixed with moisture, and humans?" She spat into the mixture, stirring it with her fingers. "Humans are very good at producing moisture." The makeshift mortar hardened almost instantly in the sub-zero air. Fletcher now held a crude but effective hammer constructed from materials that were supposed to kill her. "Tool creation phase complete," she announced, moving to shelter construction. What followed was a masterclass in applied physics that had apparently never occurred to any other species in the galaxy. Fletcher identified wind patterns, ground insulation properties, and thermal dynamics with the casual expertise of someone who had been doing this since childhood. "On Earth," she explained, while stacking crystal slabs into a windbreak configuration, "human children play games called survival camping and wilderness challenges. What you're watching is basically elementary school curriculum." Her shelter took shape with disturbing efficiency. Not the desperate burrow of a dying animal, but the calculated construction of someone who understood exactly how to extract livability from a hostile environment. Body heat retention, wind deflection, insulation from ground contact. She narrated her work like a technical manual. Plus elevated positioning for threat assessment and escape route planning. Dr. Veltar's crystalline form had achieved complete transparency. This is impossible. No biological system can function at peak efficiency under these stress conditions. Fletcher paused in her construction to look directly at the observation deck. Even through the simulation barriers, her expression was clearly visible, and it was the look of someone who had just realized they were dealing with children. Peak efficiency? She repeated. This isn't peak efficiency. This is Tuesday morning before coffee. She returned to her work, adding finishing touches to what was now recognizably a shelter designed by someone who understood exactly how to survive in conditions that should have been immediately lethal. Phase 1 complete, Fletcher announced, settling into her crystal refuge. Shelter established, tools created, baseline survival achieved. She looked up at the observation deck with that same unsettling smile. Questions before we move to Phase 2? The assembled xenobiologists stared down at her in collective horror. In less than 30 minutes, a naked human had transformed an extinction-level environment into something approaching livable. What? Dr. Yexmar managed to click. Is Phase 2? Fletcher's grin widened, revealing teeth that suddenly looked far too sharp for a supposedly non-predatory species. Dinner. 3 hours had passed since Fletcher disappeared into the simulated wasteland, and the observation deck had transformed into something resembling a crisis management center. Representatives from 7 different species huddled around monitoring stations, their earlier academic curiosity replaced by the dawning realization that they might be witnessing the emergence of a galactic nightmare. Thermal readings show she's constructed a fire, reported Lieutenant Kexhai, a Deltan sensor specialist whose own species required external heating units to prevent their blood from crystallizing. How is she generating combustion in sub-zero conditions with no accelerants? Commander Threxall studied the readouts with growing unease. His own people were apex predators on their homeworld, but what he was seeing challenged every assumption about predatory behavior. Friction ignition using crystalline dust as tinder. She's created sustained flame using geological materials. Dr. Veltar had given up trying to maintain their composed academic demeanor. Their crystalline form flickered between states like a broken hologram. This violates thermodynamic principles. Organic beings cannot generate sufficient heat to— Shut up about thermodynamics, snarled Dr. Yexmar, his usual clinical detachment cracking under the strain. Look at the metabolic readings. Her oxygen consumption has decreased, not increased. She's operating more efficiently in hostile conditions than she does in station-standard environment. The simulation chamber's main display shifted to track Fletcher's current position. She had abandoned her shelter and was moving through the terrain with a predatory grace that made Commander Threxall's fur stand on end. This wasn't exploration. This was hunting behavior. Movement patterns suggest she's tracking something, observed Captain Renth, a Carathian behavioral analyst. But the simulation's fauna protocols haven't activated yet. Check again. Fletcher's voice drifted through the comm system. She was crouched behind a crystal outcropping, completely motionless except for her eyes, which tracked something in the distance with laser focus. Your apex predator spawned 2 hours ago. It's been stalking me ever since. Every sensor in the observation deck immediately focused on Fletcher's position. The readings showed empty terrain in all directions. Negative contact, Lieutenant Kexhai reported. No life signs detected within scanning range. Fletcher's laugh was low and deeply unsettling. That's because you're scanning for alien biology. Your sensors aren't calibrated for Earth evolution predator detection. She pointed toward a cluster of crystal formations, roughly 200 meters from her position. Crystalline wolf analog, approximately 400 kilograms, hexapodal locomotion, natural camouflage that matches the terrain. It's been testing my perimeter defenses for the last 90 minutes. The observers stared at apparently empty terrain, until Dr. Yexmar's enhanced scanning protocols finally detected it, a massive predatory form that had been invisible to their instruments, perfectly blended with the crystalline environment. "Impossible," breathed Captain Renth. "No species should be able to detect camouflaged apex predators without technological assistance." "No species from your worlds," Fletcher corrected. "But Earth predators evolved alongside prey that had to detect camouflaged hunters, or die. Humans inherited those detection systems, then improved them with pattern recognition, threat assessment, and tactical analysis." She was moving again, but not away from the concealed predator. She was circling toward it. "She's approaching the apex predator," Dr. Veltar observed, their voice climbing toward panic frequencies. "This is suicidal behavior. We must abort the simulation." "No," Commander Threxall growled, though his own instincts screamed agreement. "She knew it was there. She's been planning this." Fletcher had reached a position roughly 50 meters from the camouflaged hunter. She settled into a crouch that looked casual, but positioned her for explosive movement in any direction. Then she did something that made every predatory species in the observation deck take an instinctive step backward. She smiled and made direct eye contact with the hidden creature. "Here's the thing about apex predators," she said conversationally, though her voice carried clearly through the simulation's audio pickups. "They're used to being the most dangerous thing in their environment. Makes them confident, overconfident." The crystalline wolf analog revealed itself with a howl that should have paralyzed any prey animal within kilometers. It was massive, armed with serrated crystal claws and teeth designed to shred through armor plating. The simulation's designers had modeled it after the most efficient killing machines from a dozen different worlds. Fletcher stood up slowly, never breaking eye contact, and the wolf's howl died in its throat. "But Earth apex predators," she continued, "evolved in competition with something worse than them." "What could be worse than—" Dr. Yexmar began. "Humans." The wolf analog launched itself forward with the speed of a military projectile. 400 kilograms of crystalline death, moving at velocities that should have made evasion impossible. Fletcher wasn't there when it arrived. She had moved, not away, but diagonally forward, using the creature's own momentum against it while driving her improvised crystal blade toward its throat with surgical precision. The attack lasted less than 3 seconds and ended with the apex predator collapsing in a spreading pool of luminescent blood. "Jugular, severance," Fletcher announced clinically, wiping her makeshift weapon clean. "Quick, efficient, minimal struggle. The key is understanding anatomy and exploiting structural weaknesses." She was already working on the carcass with disturbing familiarity, using crystal shards to separate meat from bone with the expertise of someone who had done this before. "Field dressing techniques," she explained, while systematically butchering what had been designed to be the simulation's ultimate threat. "Humans have been processing large game for approximately 2 million years. It's basically muscle memory at this point." Dr. Veltar's crystalline form had achieved a state of transparency that suggested complete psychological breakdown. She killed the apex predator with improvised tools, while naked. "Then started preparing it for consumption," added Dr. Yexmar, whose own species' diet consisted entirely of processed nutrients delivered through atmospheric filters. Fletcher had moved portions of her kill to the fire and was now engaged in what could only be described as cooking. The smell of roasting meat drifted through the observation deck's atmospheric recyclers, making several herbivorous species physically ill. "Protein requirement fulfilled," she announced, settling down to eat what had recently been trying to kill her. "Caloric intake sufficient for extended operations, ready to proceed to advanced objectives if required." The assembled scientists stared down at her in collective horror, She had not only survived conditions designed to be immediately lethal, she had thrived, hunted, killed, and was now dining on the apex predator while sitting naked beside a fire she had created from scratch. Advanced objectives? Commander Threxall managed to ask. Fletcher looked up from her meal with the expression of someone who had been hoping they would ask that question. Territorial expansion, she said simply. Now that I've established dominance over the local ecosystem, the logical next step is claiming additional resources and eliminating competitive threats. She gestured toward the simulation's horizon, where additional environmental hazards waited according to the program parameters. Your simulation includes secondary predator populations, environmental challenges, and resource competition scenarios. Standard human response would be systematic elimination of threats, followed by environmental modification for long-term habitation. Dr. Yexmar's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like rainfall. You're talking about conquest of an entire simulated ecosystem, while unequipped and unclothed. I'm talking about Tuesday, Fletcher corrected, returning to her meal. Though if you want to see something really impressive, you should probably stop the simulation now. Why? Dr. Veltar asked, though their tone suggested they really didn't want to know. Fletcher's smile returned, and this time it contained something that made every species. In the observation deck, remember why their ancestors had developed fear responses. Because I'm starting to enjoy myself. The simulation terminated with the abruptness of a power failure, leaving Fletcher standing in an empty white chamber holding a crystal blade that flickered and vanished along with the rest of the holographic environment. She looked up at the observation deck with mild disappointment. Really? Just when things were getting interesting? Commander Threxall's voice carried the weight of someone who had just witnessed the fundamental laws of nature being casually violated. Emergency shutdown. The simulation's ethical protocols triggered when your enjoyment began registering as recreational rather than survival behavior. Fletcher shrugged and began collecting her discarded clothing, dressing with the same casual efficiency she had demonstrated while stripping. Ethical protocols. Right. Because actually being good at survival is somehow immoral. The observation deck had emptied except for the core research team, most of whom looked like they needed strong sedatives and extended therapy. Dr. Veltar materialized beside the chamber controls, their crystalline form barely maintaining coherence. How? They asked simply. How what? Fletcher replied, pulling on her boots. Any of it, all of it. The temperature resistance, tool creation, predator detection, combat efficiency. None of it should be biologically possible for an unspecialized species. Fletcher paused in the middle of buttoning her shirt, looking genuinely puzzled by the question. Unspecialized? Who told you humans were unspecialized? Every xenobiological survey indicates. Xenobiological surveys conducted by species that define specialization as growing fur or developing exoskeletons, Fletcher interrupted. You're measuring the wrong metrics. She finished dressing and walked to the observation deck, where she found herself surrounded by alien scientists who looked at her with the expression usually reserved for natural disasters. Humans, she announced, settling into a chair with the relaxed confidence of someone delivering a routine briefing, are specialized for one thing: problem-solving under pressure. Everything else, the tool use, environmental adaptation, predator evasion, tactical thinking, those are just applications of the core programming. Dr. Yexmar's mandibles had stopped their nervous clicking. Core programming? Earth tried to kill humans for roughly 7 million years, Fletcher explained conversationally. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, predatory megafauna, climate shifts, resource scarcity, plague, famine, basically every extinction scenario in the galactic catalog. Most species either adapted to specific environments or died. Humans developed the ability to adapt to anything. She gestured toward the now empty simulation chamber. What you just watched wasn't exceptional human performance. It was a standard stress response. Humans in genuinely challenging situations are significantly more impressive. Captain Renth leaned forward with the expression of someone afraid to ask, but unable to stop themselves. More impressive? What I demonstrated was individual survival capability, Fletcher said. Humans don't usually operate individually. We're pack hunters, collaborative problem solvers. What you witnessed was the equivalent of... She paused, searching for an appropriate comparison. A single Carathian separated from their clan. Functional, but not optimized. The assembled xenobiologists exchanged glances that ranged from horror to fascination. Are you suggesting, Dr. Veltar asked carefully, that human group survival capabilities exceed individual performance? I'm not suggesting anything, Fletcher replied, with that same unsettling smile. I'm stating documented fact. Humans in groups don't just survive hostile environments, they terraform them. They turn frozen wastelands into agricultural centers, toxic atmospheres into breathable air, barren rock into garden worlds. She stood and walked to the chamber's main display, calling up Earth's environmental data with practiced familiarity. Your homeworlds, she continued, represent millions of years of evolutionary adaptation to specific conditions. Earth represents 7 million years of humans forcing every possible environment to become suitable for human habitation. The display showed Earth's biosphere, vast cities, engineered landscapes, climate-controlled agricultural zones, and atmospheric processors working on a planetary scale. This is specialization, Fletcher announced. Not growing thicker fur or developing better night vision, but developing the ability to remake entire worlds according to human requirements. Dr. Yexmar's voice was barely above a whisper. Environmental dominance on a planetary scale. Galactic scale, actually, Fletcher corrected absently. Earth's just the prototype. Human colonies have successfully established themselves in 17 different star systems, each with unique environmental challenges. Arctic worlds, desert planets, high radiation systems, low-gravity environments, doesn't matter. Humans adapt the environment to suit human needs. The observation deck fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems that suddenly sounded fragile and temporary. The really entertaining part, Fletcher continued with obvious amusement, is that most humans consider extreme survival a recreational activity. What you just witnessed in the simulation. On Earth, we call that camping. Children do it for fun during school breaks. She began walking toward the exit, then paused at the door. Oh, and just so we're clear, I'm an environmental engineer. I design life support systems and atmospheric processors. If you want to see what actual human survival specialists can accomplish. She shrugged. Well, let's just say there's a reason most galactic species prefer not to find out. Dr. Veltar's crystalline form flickered desperately. Wait. If environmental engineering is your specialty, and what we witnessed was merely recreational-level human capability, then what exactly would constitute professional-level human survival performance? Fletcher's grin returned, carrying implications that made the assembled scientists instinctively step backward. Professional-level human survival performance, she said, is what we call warfare. The door sealed behind her, leaving the xenobiologists alone with the horrifying realization that they had been sharing the galaxy with a species of casual apex predators who considered extinction-level environmental challenges to be suitable entertainment for their offspring. Commander Threxall was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone whose understanding of the universe had just been fundamentally altered. Emergency session of the Galactic Council, he announced. Priority classification, species reclassification protocol. Reclassification to what category? Dr. Yexmar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Commander Threxall stared at the empty simulation chamber where a naked human had just demonstrated the casual conquest of conditions designed to be absolutely lethal. Cosmic horror, he said simply. Humans are cosmic horror that learn to smile. Somewhere in the station's engineering section, Fletcher was back at her regular job, calibrating atmospheric processors and humming something that sounded disturbingly cheerful. The life support systems that kept dozens of alien species alive functioned smoothly under her expert care, maintained by someone who could apparently survive without them entirely. Just another Tuesday in the galaxy, where the most terrifying apex predators in known space happened to be the same species responsible for keeping everyone else's environmental systems operational. The irony was not lost on anyone.